It's the Kink Consultant Podcast, where we're turning up the heat on all things kink and dating, relationships, and pop culture. So close the door, plug in your headphones, and let's get down to it. So let's go from there, because the end of the story was basically you were both single and active play partners at that stage. Is that correct in saying?
We started as both married, trying to find a way to make our marriage work, engaging with very strict boundaries only in this thing that we do together. Nothing like romantic or beyond spanking.
As we both realized we were getting divorced, we started the process and everything. We were increasingly, I would say, romantic, maybe even relationship-y, but we were very clear that we were not just in relationships with each other. We both had free reign to explore and do what we wanted with other people.
And that made sense because you weren't even living close together.
And we intentionally, for 6 months or so, took like a step back and really tried to like give space to process the divorce and think about, I mean, we're still obviously in contact.
A lot of contact, yeah.
To give each other, space to do that.
During this time, too, I flew out to Hawaii and stayed for like 3 weeks at a time so that, we could kind of like see what it was like to cohabitate, see if our day-to-day life kind of did meld well together. And so we were like testing the waters. We were trying to be really conscientious about it.
It was a really measured way to like try it out, step back, try it out, step back.
This is all post-divorce, like after the divorces went through, and so we're both living on our own at this point when we started spending longer periods together and dipping our toes into this more.
But even as you're going through the divorce, all of this is really logical, right? Keeping some sort of distance. Emotionally, though, how are you feeling? Were you feeling like romantic feelings? I know myself, I love to fantasize. Were you imagining a life together?
I'll speak for myself. I knew as much as I could possibly know anything at that point, that was the direction that I wanted my life to take. I knew that I loved him. I felt like it was likely that it would move forward. I was always quite scared about all of that, though, because all of the what ifs. What if it doesn't? What do I do then? And all of those fears that I think we're all so familiar with.
We are really familiar with, and I love knowing that you experienced them too, because even when it felt so right, those fears creep in.
Maybe even more so. It was so right, and so if it fell apart.
Yeah. Hi.
So it's those situations of like, what if it does all go right, and all of a sudden like there's this truer version of life that you can imagine. I mean, we both had been involved in the spanking community and met different people and talked to people, and I think when we met each other, there were just so many connections on so many levels. It really was one of those amazing alignment things. No major areas of incompatibility. The compatibility is just really phenomenal. We were both at a similar place in our life and emotional maturity and approach to relationships, and we've both been through therapy, and I think all that helped. I think both of us were very also aware and intentional of this shows us what is possible when you can have a dynamic with somebody who really gets this the way that you get this. But also that doesn't mean that we're going to be together forever. Like, we still have to explore that and go through the steps, and knowing what was possible was enough for both of us to want to move forward in this very specific direction of wanting to be in a relationship with someone who shared this way, who could also support us in the other ways. But no, for sure it was a connection like I'd never really felt before when we started to build our dynamic. And
because I think what's unique about your situation and what's so hard to find is to match up both in the real world life aspect of it, but then the fetish, the fantasy interest in spanking and punishment and discipline. When those two really align, I mean, it's lightning in a bottle. And you're holding that bottle. That's scary.
It is.
I mean, we've talked a lot about, there's just, whenever power exchange is involved, or, especially in what we do with spanking and discipline too, there's just this extra levels of trust, extra levels of communication, extra levels of depth and vulnerability. It's a really powerful mixture for connection and relationship, but it is very also vulnerable.
Yeah, I would say highly vulnerable on both sides. Yeah.
Tell me what it looked like. What questions were you asking each other? How were you processing all of this when you came together?
When we were coming together, we're talking about a wide range of everything. We would talk about ways we had evolved and things we'd come to through therapy. We'd talk about what we wanted just our relationship to look like outside of the power exchange dynamic or the disciplinary dynamic.
Which of course is also innately messy, because it's not not like you're ever going to fully separate the power exchange from life. And when you are sharing in equal ways in life, but there is this power exchange when it comes to this other dynamic, it can get complicated. We had to feel our way through a lot of it. I wouldn't say we've ever had like any major missteps, but at times toes get stepped on a little bit, and you just have to come back and talk about it afterwards and be able to be really honest with one another and kind and gentle, but be very honest with one another about what is working and what isn't working as well.
When you say toes get stepped on, is that one-sided where it's you, Sarah, as the submissive have your toes stepped on, or is it both directions?
I would say it's both directions.
Yeah.
As an example, before Kai, the only way that I really knew to get a spanking to continue when I needed it to continue was to continue being really irritating, aggravating, and pushy and bratty and everything. There was this one particular situation in which Kai actually just stopped the session and he was like, okay, talk to me. What's actually going on right now? Because this is feeling a little strange to me that like...
It was like a pretty hard spanking, and it was like we were still going in it, and it was almost getting more bratty, and I was like, I just don't know where this headspace is at.
And so I think, that's kind of like a more obvious example of a situation in which, like, the way that I was used to getting those needs met was, it didn't work within our dynamic. And so we sat down and he was like, if you need it to be harder, that's, like, all you have to say is, like, right now I feel like I need to be punished and you need to give it to me harder. And, like, that's what we need. It's all of those sort of things, the tangibles and the intangibles, where you're constantly figuring it out together and navigating it together. And even when the fit is, I think, as perfect as it could possibly be, there are still going to be those moments where people are like, wait a second, like, what is going on here? Why does this feel strange?
Because it is always a balance, because a lot of the communication we do play in very select ways with other people, only with spanking, but a lot of what we do within our relationship now is more subtle rather than just like literal negotiation. It's not literally like I'm comfortable with this with a paddle, right? Like that's part of the power exchange and everything. And so there can be communication within a scene, right? Like if she's still being snarky with me, I know that she needs to still be spanked. Or something as simple as like, if you stop squirming for these next 10, then this will be over. And then if she wants to keep squirming, then she knows it can keep going. So there are ways we build that in, but that's not foolproof or fail safe.
Okay, but going back to Sarah's original example, right, where she kept bratting, was that a punishment or were you guys having fun?
That was a punishment.
This is relatively early on, but it was a punishment. But yeah, it was a punishment where on other cases it might have been an adequate punishment, but just in her headspace and what she needed, she could tell that I was winding down instead of pushing a lot deeper, and it felt to her like that's not what she needed in the moment.
And I think that there's so much power in just stopping and having a real conversation and communicating, as opposed to like letting this confusion continue. Because you're just sort of like, it's a missed connection at that stage. A question that I get all the time, and I never know how to answer it properly. So I'm really hoping you can give me like my template answer. If you enjoy spanking, how is spanking a punishment?
I've actually written a few things on FetLife about this, so if people want to go read more into my thoughts on this, they can go read my writings on FetLife about this. But I think for people who share this, spanking is a medium for communication. It's not necessarily the punishment in and of itself, because spanking can communicate different things, right? Like you can give a fun spanking. One of the examples I like to use is that even in BDSM, right, most people that I know enjoy orgasms, but forced orgasm can be it's a common punishment in the BDSM world, right? Like I'm going to force you to have orgasms until it's no longer enjoyable. Spanking for us is just a medium of how we communicate. The tone of the spanking, and I think this is where spanking and discipline fetishists deviate a little bit from some of the broader BDSM context in terms of how they think of punishment. But I think for us to withhold spanking is kind of like withholding our love language or trying to communicate with us in a different language you don't speak as well. Like we need to receive the messages we want to receive in the language we're most fluent in and in the language that feels like love and connection. And so spanking is kind of the way we use to communicate that with each other. And the tone of the spanking, the rituals of it, how we approach disciplinary spanking, all of that factors into it. But realistically, at the end of the day, I think if you're talking about altering behavior, it's the accountability between two people that really alters the behavior, and spanking is just the way that we communicate that in a way that actually feels healthy and right to us.
On a much more basic level too, and this varies across spankos, but for me, I actually hate getting a spanking. Or I hate getting like hard spankings. I really don't think I'm a masochist. I do not enjoy the pain. It is much more like a core need than something than like the sensation of it that I desire. And it's, I would say, much more in the power exchange, and it's where the spanking gets me emotionally and psychologically and sometimes even physically. It puts me, that is place that I need to go to. So spanking is for me like almost a means to an end instead of like the thing.
It's kind of like maybe going for a workout and you hate the workout, but it's the good feeling afterwards that makes it worth it.
And as Kai was saying, I think it's a way that, at least for some of us, we are seen too. I spent my entire life trying to get spanked, being like, oh, I wonder if I can get the reaction I want. But nobody ever paid attention because they didn't share my fetish, so it didn't, it wasn't the same language. But the fact that Kai sees me when I am behaving like that, and it's like, oh, I see, you need that kind of attention right now. Okay, it's really affirming in a sexual way, but a lot more than just a sexual way.
Yeah, I always think it feels like meeting someone who's finally speaking your language. Like you've been speaking a different language the whole time. And I appreciate your explanation, Kai, on the difference, and yours, Sarah. I have a much lazier approach in my explanation. I'm like, you know how you can eat food as a treat or for nutrition? I view spanking the same way because I like spanking. I like pain. The punishment aspect of it and the discipline and the lecture add something different to it. But yeah, I'll take any of it. So I understand people's confusion with me, but Sarah, you explaining for you, you don't actually love the spanking and the pain of it. It's that headspacey thing you're after. I mean, I like it all.
And even for masochists who do like it more, most of the time when it's a stern headspace and they're scolding and it's more of a disciplinary reason, it's a very different headspace and it's not enjoyable in the same way, or it doesn't feel the same.
It's definitely a different feeling. I would love to hear more about how you built your dynamic, because you knew you had a shared interest, you'd play together, but now you had to build sort of a real relationship and dynamic from scratch.
I think the challenges inherent in this are how you balance those two things, having equality and viewing each other as equal partners, and also having power exchange, which is the approach that we take. So in building our dynamic, we built it very mutually. I would say Sarah's a highly successful individual who really, like, in most areas of her life just manages it exceptionally, right? She's very on top of her life. Occasionally in the past I have, done discipline where it's a lot more basic, like you need to show up to your classes and study and whatever, right? Like the basic things, but that's not even a conversation in our relationships there. It's just very high functioning. So a lot of the way we build our dynamic is we mutually set goals and rules based on things that Sarah wants to work on. And then spanking is just in that form how I hold her accountable. But the same is true in reverse for me. There's always things that I'm working on or ways I want to improve my life. And the accountability there maybe just looks more like it would in a regular vanilla setting, where Sarah holds me accountable in different ways that don't involve switching or spanking or anything like that.
More involves conversations.
Yeah.
A lot of the rules are less dictated by me and more mutually agreed upon goals that are things Sarah wants to just improve in certain ways. And then the accountability, that's where it kind of falls into the power exchange, and I have the authority to kind of dictate how that looks and how we uphold them.
But as we've been discussing, a lot of this is, it's always a work in progress because we're always changing and developing and learning, and it's always shifting a little bit, and it's a matter of reading each other and also just really actively communicating when things feel really good or when they are not feeling as helpful or as good.
Did you go down the formal route at all with contracts and written agreements? Has it always just been a conversation?
Mostly been a conversation.
There have been times where digitally we might have just like made a list of a few of the main rules for accountability, but never like a formal contract. We've read stories, and domestic discipline contracts are fascinating and hot in their own way, but it's not something we've approached formally like that. But there are plenty of reasons to spank Sarah without a formal contract, and for us it's been more of a fluid, kind of like naturally evolving thing.
Conceptually, the idea of a contract is very hot to me, but practically it either just hasn't been like necessary or it just like didn't fit the vibe as much for us, I think.
And I think especially once we started living when we were farther apart, we did more of like writing rules down, and living together, it's just been much more of a fluid thing. It's something that's frequently on both of our minds, maybe especially me, but it hasn't fallen through the cracks at all, I don't think.
Even when accountability things don't come up, I have ways of getting spanked every day.
So is it every day?
I would say as close to every day as you can possibly get, unless I'm sick.
Unless
With the
life is happening in a
Yeah.
serious way. Do you have ritual around it, like a bedtime spanking, or how do you make sure you get it every day?
Well, frequently they are like in the moment things where I will do something to intentionally poke the bear, and in that very moment, he's like, well, we're going to take care of this right now.
Anyone who's ever seen Sarah's videos, which is probably most Spankos everywhere, know that she doesn't have a self-preservation instinct when it comes to her. She's brilliant, her mind makes witty comments, and she doesn't have a capability to keep it to herself. They just have to come out.
I would say usually there are multiple spankings a day. Not like big, long, extended things, but like 60 seconds to a couple minutes.
Thing,
yeah. Under normal circumstances, I would say probably almost nightly bedtime spankings. There are ritualistic aspects of that.
Okay, but we're not always talking about spanking. When we talk about punishment, I know from various podcasts that I've heard, but I've even seen the list. Kai, you have an external to spanking. If spanking can't happen, you have a long list of alternative punishments. How do you know when you're going to employ one of those?
That's a great question. Part of it is that prior to dating Sarah and living with Sarah, living in Hawaii, there is a very minute community here of spanking or punishment fetishes, discipline fetishes. So some of that was developed just trying to figure out ways to make long distance discipline work, which is still challenging, but it is this, it goes back to, I consider myself to kind of have two separate but very tightly interlinked fetishes because I do enjoy just discipline without spanking. Some of it depends on situations, like if we have families staying with us, even though our bedroom's very far away from our separate guest area of our house, we tend not to employ spanking just because of the awkwardness of it possibly being overheard. So then corner time or writing lines or punishment panties, which I've developed as one of my own personal favorite things. There's other ways to have some correction, and it still activates that same headspace a little bit for both of us. Not the same way as like a true disciplinary spanking, but to be able to access that.
Can I ask what punishment panties are?
I think at one point I was going to make a pair for you. People who are into this type of thing are probably familiar with different types of punishment mats, and one of the common punishment mats, which is, literally just an uncomfortable thing you sit on. So some people will use bristly door mats, but one of the common ones is the yoga acupuncture mats. So to have to sit on the little plastic spiky things, especially after a spanking, can be very uncomfortable. So I originally was like working with somebody else on Etsy, but then I've just started making them myself, where I just attach those spiky acupuncture plastic spikies to the inside of panties so that every time you sit down or move around in them, you get poked with them.
A lot of people, myself included, struggle with explaining or understanding how spanking is different from sex, right? And how it's a different need. I sort of explain that it's adjacent to my sexuality, but it's not part of it necessarily. And I know it's different for everyone, even Spankos, but how does that play a part for you both?
I would also describe it as adjacent and related. I would say it is related to sexuality. For me, goes beyond sexuality into what feels to me like a deeper need. And I have to imagine that the way that I feel about spanking is the way that most people feel about sex. It's that level of need or draw. For us, or for me, I should say, sex can be like an occasional dessert, but it's like not the main thing that I need.
I frequently reference what Gillian Keenan wrote in her book about spanking being the main course of dinner and sex being dessert. Like, you don't always have dessert, you don't even always want dessert, but you want to eat dinner most nights.
I understand why it is the main course, right? Because it's the main course for me, but also for me in real life and in spanking, I always want dessert. It's always preferable for me, because I don't get spanked every night, if it leads to sex. If I was getting spanked every day, I could definitely leave sex for like a twice a week thing. But for me, it's like I want it all in one.
Which makes total sense. For us, it is often separated. Like, we often have spanking without sex. But also, even dating back to before we were actually engaging in spanking, well, I shouldn't speak for both of us, but we've talked a lot about this, and I know it's true for both of us. Like, spanking was the thing we always thought about during any kind of sexual activities. It's just the core of the sexuality.
Yeah, 100%. I have never masturbated and thought about anything other than spanking unless someone was having sex for me as punishment. Everything has to be through the lens of punishment.
But even though it is intimately linked, we frequently have spanking without sex, and that's definitely the most pressing core need.
And I really think it's the only sustainable way to do it then. Like, sex is a lot of energy. But I also wonder if we're like, sex is a lot of energy because our core need is spanking. So we're like, that's a lot of extra work that we're just not always signing up for.
Do I feel the need to put out that energy for what I will get back when I have already gotten my needs met?
Yeah, and it's such a powerful need to have met. Something I'm on one about this lately. I think I mentioned it in a very recent podcast. When you are with another Spanko, I have partnered with a lot of non-Spankos who I teach, and at the end I always thank them and they're like, you're welcome, right? And then when I play with a Spanko, I say thank you and they're like, why are you thanking me? I should be thanking you. And that's a major difference for me. That idea of both of your needs are being met when you're with another Spanko.
100%. I do just enjoy the embarrassment factor of still making thank me for her spankings, though. So. She does have to thank me for her spankings.
Sadist.
Sadist, right? I still am okay with it because I do think there is an element of you were looking out for me. To Sarah's point from earlier, like someone noticed you, they picked up on something and cared enough to spank you. I think that deserves a thank you without any embarrassment on Sarah's part.
He makes sure it's embarrassing. But to your point, that's why what you just described, the sense of only your needs are being met, not your partner's, that's why spanking with non-Spankos has never worked for me, because it's just missing a core part of that mutual dynamic where it's this give and take and energy.
Hey, if you're loving this episode, or honestly, even just vibing with the podcast overall, go ahead and tap that 5-star rating. It takes 2 seconds, and it really helps us grow this kinky little corner of the world. Because that's what we're building here, right? A space to feel seen, get curious, and explore. All from the privacy of our own headphones. And if something made you laugh, cringe, gasp, or pause to reflect, drop a comment. I want to know what stuck with you, or shocked you. There have been times in my life where I wish this could just go away, because even now, at 36 years old, I have moments where it gets in the way of me forming good relationships with people.
I would say I have spent decades of my life truly wishing and believing that I could will this away from me, will this out of my identity, will it out of my life. I truly believe that if anyone could have done it, it would have been me.
I love that confidence.
So strong-willed.
So stubborn. So tenacious and stubborn.
So yes, I would say most of my life I have spent wishing that I were not this way so that I could have what I see so many other people having, so that I could just have the relationship and build the life and not have this. When I wasn't having this need met, it often felt to me like this, not extraneous thing, but like this thing that couldn't possibly be met that was always distracting me from getting on with my life, continuing to move.
It's almost overwhelming with just, it takes over your thoughts and everything. Yeah.
And that's the other thing too, when you're not getting these core needs met, like, or when I have been in most phases of my life where I wasn't getting my core needs met, I would fixate on spanking.
Yeah.
Like, it's all I could think about. It's all I could do. I would neglect friendships. I would neglect family. I would neglect my job. I would neglect everything else in my life because I was so fixated on this need, this core need that was not met. I have to say, on the other side of it, to have the core need met and just be able to live life like I felt like I saw everyone else living is a really powerful thing.
And to tie it back into some of the things we talked about earlier too, this is why I think it's so overly simplistic to say like, well, you like spanking, you know, like even like, well, how can it be a punishment? You like spanking. I think most Spankos, I've tried to talk to a lot of different Spankos. I just think it's really interesting to share experiences, and a lot of us don't always like it. A lot of us have very complicated relationships with us. A lot of us, like both of you have said, just have points in our life where we wish that this wasn't such a compelling part of our life because it would simplify things. It really narrows, you know, potential partners down, it narrows community down. But I also do believe on the other side of it, and I'm not saying this is universally true, but this is, I think, having this as a fetish and being able to connect with somebody, it really adds a depth of trust and intimacy and communication that builds this. I think there is a real positive for it. It can be really hard, and I've definitely wished at times I didn't have it, but I think this relationship is more powerful than any relationship I've ever had, and I think part of that is that spanking and discipline create such depth and trust and communication, and it adds another layer that really allows for something special.
Can I argue that point? I don't want to invalidate your feelings because that is your feeling, but lately there's a lot of discourse on my Instagram because I'm a firm believer that vanilla relationships can be just as dynamic and complex.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like, no, my kinky relationship was a lot deeper, the connection was deeper. But I think it more speaks to what Sarah said earlier about how we're having our needs met for the first time. If vanilla people are also having their needs met, it could be just as deep for them, in my experience. You just unlocked that for me, Kai. When you were explaining that, I was like, wait, it is deeper for us because we need to go to those depths. But it doesn't mean that a vanilla person's cup isn't equally as full.
Jillian Keenan talks about that a little bit in her book too, but I've always kind of felt like that's like there's nothing shameful about being vanilla. I think in some areas of our society there's like, oh, the cool thing to do is to have a kink or whatever. Like, I don't think there's a value judgment there at all. I think there's so many different layers and complexities to, and we say vanilla meaning you don't have a fetish as a focus of your sexual identity. Your sexual identity is sex, but there's so many layers and facets to that too. I don't think there's a value judgment at all with being vanilla, but I don't think it meshes well with our needs, or at least for us. Like, we were not able to build the same depth of relationship with vanillas because of our needs and how they align.
I really do rail against this idea that vanilla relationships aren't as deep, and I think, wow, I have to tell you, something has settled in my body because I've been churning over this for weeks, and it just keeps coming up in this conversation. And Kai, I hope you don't feel like I was sort of arguing with you or invalidating what you said. It's just, for me, I'm like, oh, it finally clicked.
I never take offense about discourse. I think this is why we enjoyed talking to you for 3 hours the first time I was spank you instead. Was I think this is how we grow. I mean, this is part of why I love talking to just spankos about their experiences too. We bounce ideas off of each other. There's not a lot of reference points. It's not like we have a culture with movies about being spankos.
We're figuring it out as we go.
Yeah.
And we really learn from sharing our stories with each other, and I think it's important for people to share their stories and hear different sides of things and talk through these things.
There are no manuals for this. I always start with my clients I talk about love languages, and then I have to sort of relate them to kinks. We don't have a book of love languages for kink yet. Now I'm like, okay, that's something that would be helpful. We've sort of touched on it, right? Someone did ask, Kai was kind enough to share his FetLife Ask Me Anything questions that he's received, and I think we may have answered it, but if not, what is the most challenging thing about being a Spanko?
I don't know. I think for me, it's probably been lack of understanding and lack of acceptance. It's just something that, in a way, feels... It's hard for other people to understand or relate to if it's not something they innately get, or they're not really open-minded. And I think, like, I did try to talk to some of my close friends as I was going through divorce, very realistically, about why I was going through divorce, because a lot of them didn't necessarily understand. It is just hard and a little bit isolating in that way. And I think for people who are dating, it really creates a difficult decision that you have to make. Where does this rank in your needs in terms of a partner? And there are definitely other equally or more important needs. Just because Sarah's a Spanko, I couldn't be with her, if she was really dishonest or, emotionally abusive or whatever. But it is still such a core need. So yeah, I don't know. I think
I would say for me twofold. On the one pragmatic level, finding a partner is the hardest thing that I experienced about being a Spanko. The pool is just much smaller than the general population, and it is very difficult to find a partner who fits you kind of on all the normal life levels and all of the Spanko levels, and then also you're at the same point in your life and your development, and it makes sense to go on. So on a pragmatic level, I would say that. But since I have really come into living this really authentic life for me, and this ties to what Kai was saying, one of my biggest challenges has been maintaining the same level of depth with my friendships with vanilla people as I am able to maintain with my friends in the fetish scene, in the kink scene. it's as simple and complex, I think, as I am able to bring my whole self into my friendships and relationships with people with fetishes. Whereas there is, like, it almost, to some extent, it doesn't matter how open a vanilla person is, they're never going to be able to understand me on that level, which is okay. And like, so much of our lives is kind of bridging gaps in understanding. But when you find a community of people who just innately understand you, and you don't have to explain or struggle to explain, or not, we don't have a lot of language yet to even explain what this is, even amongst ourselves. When you don't have to bridge that, it just creates, I think, a smoother path in friendships. Maintaining those other relationships, I think, has become a little bit more complicated for me.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
Especially I think we both were maybe not necessarily expecting that the spanking community would bring so many truly amazing people into our lives, but there are just such phenomenal, intelligent, dynamic people in this community, and it's really brought amazing new friendships into our lives, but it does make it challenging.
When it comes to finding a partner, it's not a pool, it's a puddle, because when you whittle it down. However, there is a really great diverse group of friends you can make in this scene, for sure. And we're all lucky to have found each other by going to these national parties and really putting ourselves out there to meet other people.
For us, the national parties are community building and friendship building. It's meeting like-minded people and meeting friends and quality time with friends. And
you really do put in the time and effort to maintain those friendships that matter so much to you. So as you were building your dynamic, right, you had obviously been open to playing with other people. Did you ever have a conversation of, should we close this off? I know a lot of Spankos do have this conversation of, if you meet someone, will you stop playing and stop going to parties?
Yeah, we did. It's another one of those fluid things too. We both talked a lot early on about how it felt like for both of us it would feel good to be able to continue to play with others, like with boundaries. But I would say it's a conversation that we continue to have with one another, including, like, not just generally, but including about, like, individual people, like, how would it feel if I played with XYZ person. And I think part of the safety of what we've built is we both know that if the other ever had an emotional response, it would just be an immediate, like, okay, that isn't working anymore, and that's okay. I don't think, as with most things, any of the kind of structures we build for our relationship, it's constantly open to revision in a way. That really builds in, for me at least, a lot of feelings of safety and security in the relationship.
Kai, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, we talked a lot early on about how, and especially as we really got into our relationship, that all of our needs are met within our relationship. This is like something that we choose to engage in as something that feels good to us, but it's not, for us, it's definitely not a core need or an integral part to be open to playing with others. It's just something that we, for a variety of reasons, feel compelled to and feel like we want to engage in. I totally agree. I think having, and they've evolved over time, but having clear boundaries for how we play with others has really helped. One of the questions I get a lot is about veto power. I think there's just a much simpler way to look at it, which is just like my respect for Sarah will always come before anything else. It's not veto power so much as it's, if she doesn't feel comfortable with the situation, why would I want to engage in that? First and foremost, for our relationship to be strong, and none of this is necessary stuff. But yeah, we've set boundaries over how we have spanking with others, and I think that allows us to engage in it in a way that really feels okay and good to both of us. And
of course, this is going to be different for so many different people. Like, some people do really have a core need to play with multiple partners, and so I think it's one of those things that every Spanko and every Spanko dynamic kind of has to figure out together. It's such an interesting thing because spanking is such a powerful connection between the two of us, and yet getting to share it with friends feels often opening or expansive more than like scary or anything else. It feels like a natural part of being a Spanko for me in any case.
Yeah, like the enjoyment is multiplied by having all of these people. Not gonna lie, I stole that from Sister Wives opening sequence. It's like love is multiplied, not divided. But it works here.
it does work.
Besides, I love to watch him give spankings, and then I'm not the one suffering. I can just enjoy it, and I can see all the little intangible things that I can't see when I'm experiencing it. So
I remember you said that when he spanked me, and I was really curious. I was like, well, now I want to know what his face looks like.
For us, we are like romantically and relationship wise and sexually, we're monogamous with each other. So spanking within the defined boundaries is kind of the way in which we're open. But I think for us, it works in that way where we have our space within our relationship, and then we have this specific way where it feels really expansive to engage with friends.
It makes total sense. Like, and it is so fun. It's really hard to explain the enjoyment of parties and really expanding your group unless someone shows up to it. So I would recommend anyone who has an opportunity to go to a national party, no matter what their kink or interest is, even if it's a general fetish or kink party, I would highly recommend checking it out.
as a hyper introvert, I can agree. It is really affirming. It's really affirming and good.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Because I am not an introvert at all. And I just forget that that can even be scary for people.
Yeah, it can be very, very overwhelming. It's worth it to go have the experience to be in a room full of people who are like you.
Yeah, and honestly, I'd say even if you're introverted or even if you don't feel like you would feel comfortable being spanked at something like that, it is still entirely worth it to go. The main part of us going is we just like to, we spend most of our time sitting in rooms with friends or new people talking and hanging out, and it's just so awesome to connect with people who are truly like-minded, and it's such an amazing community of people.
Have you ever misstepped with a spanking or punishment, Kai? And how did you repair and come back from that?
As part of our dynamic, we discussed that too, where if the headset, which is not to say, if something happens and it feels like discipline is warranted, it might be as simple as like, I'm in a really bad headspace tonight, like let's just revisit it tomorrow, or like I don't feel like I can be spanked right now. We definitely, and Sarah has safe words, and that's always respected. I don't know that I've like had a big misstep to where I felt like I've had to apologize or anything like that, but I do think it's very important. Like, you're not omniscient and all powerful as a top, right? Like, I think it's really important to acknowledge as a top that you do make mistakes and you're not perfect. I think part of that is like the example earlier, like stopping a spanking if things just don't feel right, to say like, hey, I think there's a feeling as a top sometimes in that role, like you just have to stay in top mode. So I think trying to be humble in that way of being like, hey, I really don't know what's going on here, can we talk through this? Like, I guess I'd just say just try to be humble and honest about, like, I'm not perfect, like not every, I guess maybe I know you would have thought too, a sort of adjacent experience. Like, I've definitely had like times where I've planned a certain scene with somebody at a national party and things got chaotic, and I've ended up happening is not at all what was hoped for or expected, and people have felt a lot of disappointment. But I think, just owning that honestly as a human. The managing times at a national party is hard, and I'm not always able to give the headspace and experience that I think people see in my videos or maybe want to have, even though, I do my best. And yeah, I don't know. I think just being humble and honest about the fact that you're not an omniscient top, you're not a perfect top.
So to have to learn and receive the feedback, you didn't give someone the experience they were hoping for. Maybe that's just me. Like, that is really tough for me to overcome. So I enjoyed hearing your perspective on it. Like, sometimes you have to accept that you are human and these things happen.
Dynamic or chemistry is always going to vary between people. And so you may go into a scene with somebody expecting that it's going to be one thing, and then it ends up being something else entirely. And those are a lot of things you just can't control. I think there's another side too of the question you were asking in terms of like a scene not going quite right or something. And I think the other side of it too is that it's important that you're with a partner, a play partner who you can trust. This isn't feeling good right now because he's not omniscient. Even if he operated, quote unquote, perfectly all the time to like his own very high standards, to be clear, there are just going to be moments where things aren't vibing right. Also, I think it's really important to be able to trust your partner to say, you know what, like, I got to use my safe word because right now something about this isn't feeling good. So
when safe words come up, I frequently talk with people I'm spanking about that too. Just like that's an aspect of the trust, and is being able to trust. And I know for a variety of factors it's not always possible. Yes. We have to recognize that too. But being able to trust, it lets me be more myself if I can trust that you will stop it if things are going in a poor way. And I think one of the points of pride is that I try to monitor someone very closely. I try to monitor their breathing and, their reactions and a lot of different things about how they're, and even medically, how their skin looks and whatever, how they're taking something. But that's a poor substitute for, I still have no idea what's, mentally going on or what their condition is. And so.
And I think it's an important note that you can call a safe word even if you can't name the reason you're calling it.
You don't need to have a reason. All it has to be is like, right now, something doesn't feel good.
That's
Right.
enough of a reason to call it.
And I've had people say for it, and as a top, I've never felt anything other than like, okay, good, I'm glad they stopped this scene when it wasn't going right for them. I've never felt upset that a safe word was used or anything. I'm always just like,
and I think that's a sign of a good top, is someone who can accept that a safe word's been used and something has happened and we don't take it personally. We just sort of are like, okay, let's assess the situation and figure it out.
100%.
Do you two have like different levels of infractions when you play together? Like, are there rules of like, okay, well, we both know that you were a little extreme in your behavior, so it's leading to XYZ?
Yeah. Most of them involve me keeping myself and my body safe. Probably
most of the more serious things.
Yeah, most of the more serious things are me keeping myself and my body safe. An example of a moment in which I immediately knew I was in a great deal of trouble and he immediately switched was when we were moving a bed and he went to get furniture sliders, and when he was gone I was like, I can just do this, and I moved the bed by myself.
The whole bed, yeah.
And he came in and he was like, your wrist, like, what is happening right now? Your wrist has so many problems.
Yeah, and this is where things are specific to the dynamic. It's for very specific health reasons, specific to Sarah, that we have rules so that she doesn't badly injure herself.
And so, yeah, there are those kind of touch point things where I'm like, oh, okay, right now I'm in very serious trouble.
And I think those spankings are much more ritualized. Those are much more, there's going to be corner time beforehand. She's going to stand in front of me and be scolded.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're hiding behind your shirt. I love it. But to the point, I mean, that is the exact reason when it switches to not being fun anymore. When you hit to those points. And then, Sarah, have you ever come out of a punishment or a spanking and thought, yeah, what I did was still worth it?
Not when it comes to the more serious things, but when it comes to, should I have put that fake bug under his pillow?
Recent example, a fake cockroach that I laid down in bed and had a fake cockroach under me.
Yes, I should have done that.
And I'd do it again.
So yeah, I would say, the sillier things or the, like poke the bear things. Frequently, I'm like, yeah, that was worth it. I am sorry right now, and also I will do it again.
But like the wrist example, do you think that it makes you think twice the next time of like, oh, I really do need to look out for my body right now?
Yes. And it is somewhat about like avoiding the spanking, but that isn't mostly what it's about. It's much more about recognizing like, oh wow, yeah, I really overstepped the line of like what it is good for me personally to do, in my life or with my body right now. That is a really excellent reminder of like that there are reasons that we don't do that. Again, like having somebody who sees that and knows it and cares about it and like does the thing reminds me emotionally and psychologically, like there are reasons we don't do that. There are like much worse consequences than this spanking can happen if you continue doing that sort of thing. That's what really triggers it for me.
That sounds like exactly the scolding that you probably I would guess that probably the scolding, but discussion, like the conversation that we have before the spanking begins is maybe even more powerful than the spanking, just like about why this is even a thing. And yeah, it's where the accountability aspect I think really comes in, right? It's like you're far more likely to go regularly to a gym if you have a buddy who's meeting you there, who's expecting you to be there. You know, it's, with everything going on in her life, and Sarah is highly athletic and strong, but left to her own devices, she might not think as much about this. But to have somebody who's like, I care about your long-term health and how you treat your body, and I'm not cool with this, is a reminder like, okay, maybe I don't do this thing that might put myself at risk.
I mean, it's a good reminder. It's helpful because especially if not calling anybody stubborn, but if you were prone to being a little bit stubborn, this can get you out of that cycle of stubbornness.
Yeah.
It can. Again, I think part of it is just it being seen and taken seriously by somebody else. Yeah, it's not just about me doing what I want to do because I want to do it. It is that somebody else wants to share in my life, like wants me to be healthy and not hurt and all of these things. And that's motivating.
And it doesn't hurt that every time she sits down for a few days, she's reminded that she got spanked. So that doesn't hurt.
Does it still last a few days, the pain?
The really intense ones, which happens sometimes. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Sarah definitely doesn't bruise or mark.
I don't.
Really, but definitely she can feel it for a while, a bit.
Part of my weird condition is that I don't bruise, which is very disappointing.
That is disappointing. It was, so you've never really bruised. It wasn't like it wasn't I've built up a tolerance, because that happens in our space too, where people just get so used to it they stop marking.
That's happened a bit.
My body gets so used to it that I stop turning red, which is really upsetting.
That is so sad.
I hate it so much. So yeah, my body does do some of that too, but I basically just don't mark.
And then she has to remind me, like, I know I'm not nearly as red as, somebody you spanked recently, but this hurts really badly and it's really hard.
I love that level of communication, though. Like, even, like, you still need the basics, even if you are spanking her every day. So you have really been through a lot, both of you, in your journeys. It feels like you have some really good advice. What would you just say to other people who are where you were even 5 years ago?
One of the best things that I ever did for myself was not just look for play partners in our community, but also seek out friendships. It helps in so many different ways. I think it helps, number one, in feeling less... I spent so much of my life feeling like I was crazy, or like crazy to be so different from everybody else. To have how I am feel normal and accepted and understood was profound for me. But even and beyond that, beyond the like building of the friendships, is building that network and that community of people also helps in really pragmatic ways. It helps when, say, somebody reaches out to you on FetLife and is interested in playing, and you can reach out to your network and say, like, has anyone else heard of this guy? Has anyone else played with him, or girl, or whoever? Mm-hmm. And you also just meet so many new people through those communities. I think instead of just using FetLife like I did early on as a way to sort of try to find spanking partners, using it actually as a way of getting to know a lot of different people helped me a great deal. When I was hyper focused on just finding a partner, I found it a very frustrating space to be in. When I used it much more as this is a community of people who understands this side of me, that's when a lot of things started opening up.
And in order to do that, like, one of the things that you're saying without actually saying is, when you show up for your community and be in your community, as opposed to looking at it as a way to just meet your person, instead of just looking at what you can take from the community, not that you were being a taker, showing up in the community is one of the best first steps you can take.
Yeah, it's not just a means to your own personal end.
That was really good. So what is next for you both?
We have a lot of different things going on in our own life. One of the things that's really driven us and compelled us is just to really try to make this more, to try to help normalize this. I think we both grew up feeling a lot of shame about this, and I think that the generations today get earlier exposure to the internet and finding communities, and so I think everything Sarah said about finding communities is so true. I think why we love sharing our videos and pictures is just to be able to relate to people that, hey, this is just one more normal other way of expressing yourself and your sexuality. It's okay that this is all a part of you. So one of our longest and best friends in the scene is Mookie Darling, and Mookie and Amanda are currently working on a book to collect the stories of people who are fetishists, whether it's spanking and discipline fetishists or other fetishes, and I think that fits really well into things that are really important to Sarah and I, which are sharing stories and helping normalize this and helping people see that they're not alone, and all of this is just a very valid way to express yourself. So the links are all over FetLife. If anyone listening has a fetish or sharing your story, whether it's, you know, as part of this story collection where they're really trying to collect stories, or even if it's just with your community. I think it's really important for us to show up in that way for each other, to just make this a normal experience.
Thank you, Kai. I do find it hard to self-promote, which is unfair to Mookie even, but complicatedpleasures.ca. If you go to that website, you'll learn more about the project and the book we're hoping to put together. And I was honored when Mookie asked me to be part of the project, because we met and I said the really important thing for me is that you include the sacrifices we sometimes have to make to pursue our authentic lives. And she asked me back if I'd be interested in joining her on this project. We're already getting so much help, including from Sarah, on how to navigate this, the right questions to ask, and how to collect stories, I guess ethically, but authentically too.
It's really important. It is part of why we play with others, part of why we share. Sharing these stories and sharing experiences and connecting in these ways is really crucial.
For me, it is all about de-shamifying and destigmatizing all of this, because we do have to handle it. All right, well, it was such a pleasure to have you both on. I'm really excited, especially because you are part of my real personal community of people who I've met in real life, like my online community, and it's as hard as it can be to have this fetish, and I've lived with it and hidden it for so long. It is exceptionally special when we get to connect with each other and relate.
It is.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with anyone who might find it interesting. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, feel free to reach out. Email info@thekinkconsultant.com. Until next time, keep on kinking on.